Right, good afternoon. Welcome to the Post-OPT Application Workshop Part 1 on this 100th day before degree conferral on a very windy day. I am going to share my presentation in just a minute. My name is Mario Mihalcic. I'm one of 5 international student advisors here at the Bechtel International Center, and I'm very happy to be here with you today. This session is being recorded. It will be posted to our post-OPT webpage where you can already find this presentation linked, the PowerPoint presentation linked, but the recording will be a link there as well. Let me go ahead and start by sharing my screen. So this session is specifically for spring quarter graduates who will be applying for OPT. You can start the application process today. Today is the first day that you can submit your request for an OPT endorsed I-20 through the Bechtel International Center. I'm starting with this note here because we are running headlong into spring break, so a lot of you will be traveling. And one of our biggest fears with the OPT application moving online is that a lot of you may think that you can apply for OPT from outside the United States once you get your OPT endorsed I-20. That is not possible. It wasn't possible when it was a paper application. It is not possible now that it's an online application. You must be in the United States when you're submitting that OPT application to USCIS. The earliest that you can submit that OPT application to USCIS will be March 14th, so 10 days from today. Again, we're starting out with this warning specifically for the spring quarter graduates because of the upcoming spring break. Some of you may have already left the United States. But again, you cannot apply for OPT from outside the United States. When you hit that submit button, to USCIS, you must be within the United States. Again, welcome to our post-completion optional practical training workshop, part 1. We're going to go over some resources that we have for you online. We'll take a look at the post-OPT application timeline. Then we'll take a deep dive into applying for post-OPT. Requesting the post-OPT endorsement, and then a review of the documents that you'll need to gather for your post-OPT application. A look at the I-765 and filing online. So all the information that I'm about to share with you is on our website already. So it's on our post-OPT webpage. This is also where you'll find this presentation, the recording of this presentation linked, as well as the PowerPoint slides from this presentation. On that web page, we have a few documents to help you out. One is a USCIS checklist of the items that you'll need when completing the OPT application. The tips for filling out the I-765, it's actually not a tip sheet, it's a guide. So it goes through every field of the online 765. And then there's a final review checklist that you can use before submitting your button, before submitting your post-OPT application to USCIS online. We do not review applications individually because of all the resources that we have available to you online. Part 2 of this application workshop will be on March 14th at 4 p.m. Part 2 will not be recorded, as I was saying earlier. This is more of a session for you to be able to unmute yourself, ask any last minute questions you might have before submitting your application. We'll also do a brief review of using the final review checklist. So that's what we'll be doing on March 14th. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us by email. internationalstudents@stanford.edu. And also, if you need a more immediate response, you can schedule an afternoon advising session via Zoom, and that's by appointment. There's now 3 advisors doing afternoon advising, so there should be plenty of slots, although they do fill up quickly still, available to you. And again, another note that you cannot submit your OPT application to USCIS from outside the US. You have to be inside the US when you submit that OPT application to USCIS. So let's look at your post-OPT application timeline as spring graduates. Your spring 2022 degree conferral date is June 12th. The program end date on your I-20 should be June 12th, 2022. If it is not, if it's a future program end date, we will shorten your end date to June 12th, 2022 on your I-20 when we endorse it for OPT. 100 days before degree conferral date is today, March 4th. Today is the earliest that you can request your OPT endorsed I-20 through Bechtel Connect. And then, as I mentioned earlier, March 14th is the earliest that you can submit your OPT application to USCIS. You cannot submit it earlier than 90 days. If you submit it on March 13 or March 12th, USCIS will reject it. So the earliest you can submit your application to USCIS is March 14th. That is their policy and their regulation. When we endorse your I-20 for OPT, it's valid for 30 days. So if you request the endorsement now because you're super eager to get your OPT application done and submitted to USCIS by March 14th, but you travel or something happens and you wait a few weeks after March 14th to start submitting your application to USCIS, you may run into a situation where your OPT endorsement has expired. So when we're talking about when your OPT application, when your OPT endorsement is valid, it's not necessarily the date that you see on the I-20. There's nowhere on the I-20 that will tell you when your OPT, when your I-20 was endorsed for OPT. So because of that, you should consider, and this is my advice to you, you should consider when you make the request to be the start of the 30 days of validity. So that's kind of what you, the clock that you want to have in your head that's ticking. When you request your I-20 for OPT endorsement, we have to ask, and we will ask for your requested start date of employment. That requested start date of employment has to be between June 13th, so the day after degree conferral, and no later than August 11th. That is the 60-day grace period following degree conferral. So your requested start date has to fall between those, on or between those dates. So we often get asked, what start date of employment should I choose? And some of the things that students will consider when thinking about their requested start date of employment is, do I have a job offer already? Is there a job lined up for me? OPT is an umbrella work authorization, so you will not necessarily be applying for OPT with a job offer. You may not have one. That's okay. You still should go ahead and apply for OPT early in the application window, because the longer that you wait to apply for OPT, the longer you'll have to wait after graduation to start working. So you do not have to have a job offer to apply for OPT. But if you have one, that may be something you take into consideration as to the requested start date. If you don't have a job offer yet, some students are more confident about finding a job than other students. Some students may want to build in some extra time to be able to find a job. So they may set an employment start date that's in July or towards the end of August, because they're going to use that grace period to continue looking for a job. Otherwise, if you set a requested start date of employment of July 15th, but you don't have a job ready to go on July 15th, maybe it doesn't start until, maybe you don't find a job that doesn't start until August 15th. Any days between the start date of employment on your EAD card, the employment authorization document that you get from USCIS when your OPT application is approved, any days from those start days until you have a job gets counted against the 90 days of unemployment that you're given by USCIS. Once you've run out of those 90 days of unemployment, your OPT ends. So some students who are not confident that they'll be able to find a job even after graduation may put a requested start date later in the 60-day grace period, closer to August, for example. Some students may want to take time off after graduation and not necessarily start working right away. So they know that in advance, and so they'll put a requested start date in July or August instead of June. Also, some students may want to build in vacation time before starting work. And so if you have somebody that wants to hire you, but you have a requested employment start date of July or August, you legally cannot work until you get that EAD card and have reached your start date of employment on that EAD card. So you have a legitimate legal reason to say, hey, I can't start working, and then you're able to travel or take some time off before you start your employment. A couple of things to note is that once you submit your application to USCIS, you cannot change your requested start date of employment. So that will be set in stone. Before you submit your application to USCIS, you can request us to change your start date of employment. That's okay. But once you hit that submit button to USCIS and your application is with USCIS, your start date of employment cannot change. It is what it is. Sometimes a student will want to change that start date because they didn't have a job offer when they applied for OPT, so they set the start date in August, but now they have one. Company wants them to start in July. They won't be able to. And sometimes it's the other way around. Sometimes they have a start date after June, but then realize that they're able to take some time off before they start working, want to move it to July. Once that application's with USCIS, you cannot change your start date of employment. And then sometimes we get asked what the end date of employment will be. That is 1 year minus a day from your start date of employment. So what does applying for post-OPT look like? What are your steps? Your first step is that you apply to graduate. You do that in Access. That's available now. Your second step is to submit the OPT endorsement request in Bechtel Connect, so that way we can endorse your I-20 for OPT. Then you'll start putting together your application, your supporting documents that you need to submit your application to USCIS using our USCIS checklist. And then once you've got all of that ready to go, and it's March 14th or after, you use the final review checklist to check your application and submit it to USCIS. So those are your steps for applying for OPT. So let's take a look at requesting for post-OPT endorsement using Bechtel Connect. So you will go to the landing page for Bechtel Connect. It's bechtelconnect.stanford.edu, and under employment, you're going to see optional practical training, and you're going to click on Start New Request. You're going to select that you have a student ID and password to log in. I think it looks a little different than this right now. And then it'll say Request 2022, and you'll hit Apply. You'll have 5 boxes that show up. Box 1, 2, and 3 are information for you. Let's take a look at those. So box 2 again is just providing you a link back to our post-OPT page. Box 4 is an attestation saying that you understand that you're eligible for post-OPT, and then some of the requirements that you'll have under post-OPT to maintain your status. Box 5A is where you're going to tell us your requested start date of employment. So again, in this example, it's this was a summer graduate, and their requested start date is 1 year, end date is 1 year minus a day. You'll always be applying for full-time post-OPT, and your type will be post-completion. And then in the student remarks, you'll just follow the guide there. It says employment in the field of whatever your major was. 5B, are you applying for post-OPT? You'll answer yes. And then here is where you're going to upload a screenshot that you applied for graduation. Once you complete all those boxes, they'll be checked as you go along. And then you hit the submit button on the top of that page, and that's when it's officially submitted to us. You'll notice that nowhere does it ask for any employer information. So if you do have a job offer lined up, you will not be entering that information. It's not needed when you're applying for post-completion OPT. And that information is actually something that the employment information is something that you'll be entering after you reach the start date of employment on your EAD card in a system called the SEVP portal that's run by the US government. So after graduation, you're going to be talking directly to the US government through this SEVP portal. You'll be reporting your employment there. If you don't, the US government thinks you're unemployed and you start counting against those 90 days of unemployment. So it's really important that when you reach the start date of employment on your EAD card, that you use the SEVP portal to report your employment. That portal does not become accessible to you until you reach the start date of employment on your EAD card, or a few days later. You'll get an email from SEVP with a link to creating that portal account. So again, if you have employer information, because you have a job offer lined up already, that information doesn't get entered here when you make the endorsement request. Right. So now let's take a look at the application, the OPT application to USCIS. So these are the supporting documents. So this is the application, the online application to USCIS. It's a Form I-765, which you do online. And then as part of that application, the Form I-765, you're going to be uploading one passport style photo as a JPEG, and then a PDF of your most recent I-94, a PDF of your passport bio page, a PDF of all your previous CPT or OPT endorsed I-20s. Prior to the online application, when it was a paper application to USCIS, they were asking for all of your previous I-20s. Now with the online application, they're only asking for your previously CPT or prior OPT endorsed I-20s. So they don't need all of your I-20s, just the ones that were authorized for CPT or a prior OPT. And then you'll need a PDF of your post-OPT endorsed I-20, and then there's a fee payment. So when you get the post-OPT endorsed I-20 from us, you do have to print it out and you have to sign the first page. And then you're going to scan it back in as a PDF. Some application tips: do not file online with USCIS without receiving the OPT endorsed I-20. Do not submit your application to USCIS more than 90 days before degree conferral date, as I mentioned earlier. The USCIS online system uses the UTC, or Coordinated Universal Time. So when you're submitting your application to USCIS, they're not receiving it based on our time zone here in California. They're receiving it based on this UTC time zone. If you have one name, you're going to list your one name in the last name field. And then I'll talk a little bit more about this, but The I-765 asks for your physical address and for a mailing address if it's different from your physical address. So when you're considering what mailing address to use, you want to make sure that there will be somebody at that mailing address for the next 6 months who can receive your EAD card. One of the big headaches around this is if your EAD card gets lost. So you really want to make sure that this mailing address is valid and that somebody will be at that mailing address for the next 6 months to be able to receive that card. It's usually a trusted friend or family member. For the passport photo, students have reported using an app that they've purchased on their phone to do the photo. You're not supposed to mess around with the photo itself, but there are apps out there that can do passport style photos using your phone. If not, you can always get a physical passport photo and then scan it in as a JPEG using a scanner. What you don't want to do is take a picture of the picture and use that, but you can scan, if you do get a physical copy or physical passport style photo, just scan it in. And then when you're going to pay the fee to USAS for the OPT application, you have to be using either a credit card that came from a US financial institution, or if you're going to do like a direct payment out of your checking account, that also must be a US financial institution. USCIS can't accept credit card or bank payments from a foreign bank. So again, this is a list of the supporting documents that you'll be uploading. The US passport style photo, the Form I-94 has to be from your most recent entry to the US. So when you access that I-94, make sure that it is. Sometimes students will access the I-94, but it's from a previous entry, not the most recent entry, because of the way CBP entered you. Maybe they put a different passport number or flipped your name, first and last name. So you have to make sure that that I-94 that you're looking at is from your most recent entry. And that's because the I-94 number changes every time you enter the US. So it doesn't stay the same. It's not static information. Every time you enter the US, that I-94 number changes. You will also be entering that I-94 number on the I-765. You have to one of your other supporting documents will be a government issued ID, in which case this is the passport. Sometimes somebody may have applied for a prior OPT and still has that EAD card. I mentioned uploading that. I still advise using the passport bio page as your government ID, and then you can upload the EAD. You can still upload the EAD card. And then the previously authorized CPT or OPT I-20s, and then your I-20 that was endorsed for OPT, signed on the first page by you. They do have file requirements for these documents. They have to be clear and readable. They have certain accepted file formats. Your PDF should not be encrypted or password protected because they can't get into it. So make sure that they are not encrypted or password protected. And then the maximum size is 6 megabytes per file. All right, so when you go to file the online I-765, you're going to go to myaccount.uscis.gov. This might look a little different now, but you're going to go to My USCIS once you create your account. And then you'll find the link that says File a Form Online. And you'll select I-765, Application for Employment Authorization. And then that will take you to the I-765 itself. So let's take a look at that. And for this, I'm going to share another screen. So this is our guide for post-completion OPT for the online I-765. Again, this guide, which you can find linked on our post-OPT page or on this PowerPoint presentation, takes you field by field through the online I-765. So you will be selecting C3B, Student Post-Completion OPT. Your reason for applying is the initial permission to accept employment. If you have never filed for OPT before, you'll say no. And if someone assisting you with completing this application, you'll select no. Your current legal name, that name, how you enter it on the I-765 should match how your name is entered on your I-20, which should match how your name is entered on your passport. So those three names should match. So make sure that the name on your I-20 matches the name on your passport, because that's how you're going to be entering it on this online I-765. If you've used a variation of your name, like I was talking to one student whose first and last name was switched for some reason on the I-20 and only now corrected it for the OPT application, then you would mark yes, and it'll bring up fields for you to enter the different variations of your name that you've used. Or if you've used nicknames before on official documents or with the school, you'll list those here. How may we contact you? Your student email address should remain active for the duration of your OPT, and if you're eligible, also for the STEM extension for up to 3 years after graduation. So you can use your student email account. This is also the email account that will likely be used by SCVP for the SCVP portal. But you can use a personal email address that's not your student email account, but I would highly encourage you to use your student email. So here's where they ask you for your US mailing address. Again, I can't stress enough, the mailing address that you use should be one that's going to be valid for the next 6 months. If your mailing address is different from your physical address, then you're going to enter your physical address as well. Your physical address is where you're currently living at the time that you're filling out this online application. So it's not going to be a future address that you might be moving to or an address that you just left. It's the address where you're at while you're filling out this application. That's your physical address. But you can have a different mailing address. And then the next few fields deal with your biographical information. Again, here's where they ask you for your I-94 number. And again, you're going to take that I-94 number that you got from the printout of your I-94 or the PDF of your I-94. Again, you want to make sure that I-94 is reflecting your most recent entry to the US, because that I-94 number does change. And then it's going to ask you some specific information about your last arrival to the United States. What is your travel document number? You can leave that blank. There's a few here that you will leave blank, just 2 or 3 at the most. Your current immigration status should be F1. You can confirm that on the I-94 PDF. It should indicate that you entered the US in F1 status. If it does not, that's a pretty serious problem. You have to meet with one of us immediately to figure that out. So you can check your I-94 and confirm that indeed your last entry into the US was an F1 status. And then I'll ask for your CUS ID number. A number and what is your USCIS online account number? There's a checkbox there you can check. You don't have to enter that information. Most likely you don't have either of those just yet. And then there's a field for social security number. If you don't already have a social security number, you can use the I-765 to apply for that. It's going to ask for your, if you do, it'll ask for your parents' names. If you have ever applied for a social security number, you got it and you've lost it, you still have a social security number. You can use this to apply for a card, a replacement card, but I wouldn't suggest doing that. I would suggest just doing that through a Social Security Administration office. And then after the Social Security number field is where you're going to upload your evidence. That's where you upload your passport photo, the I-94, your government ID, that would be your passport bio page. And then there'll be a section where you upload your previously authorized CPT or prior OPT endorsed I-20s. And then the final upload field is for your OPT endorsed I-20. And again, just a warning to make sure that if you don't file in a timely manner after receiving your OPT endorsed I-20, that you request a new endorsement, not just a reprint of your I-20, but a new endorsement of your OPT. The additional information section you will use to note the date, the CVIS ID number, and any CPT authorization that you might have. We have an example of how to enter that information. So if you were endorsed for CPT while you were a student, you will note that in this additional information section, the CVIS ID number under which you were endorsed for CPT, whether it was part-time or full-time, the dates of that CPT authorization, and the degree level. If you had a different CVIS ID number, you'll also use this additional information section to let USCIS know what your previous CVIS ID number was. That can happen if you took a leave of absence of more than 1 quarter and we had to issue you a new CVIS, a new I-20 that would have come with a new CVIS ID number. If your name is too long in that very first category, then you can use the additional information field to give them your entire name. And then after all of that, you will complete the online I-765 by submitting your fee payment. And again, if you're going to use a credit card or do it directly out of your checking account, the credit card has to be issued by a US financial institution, or the checking account has to be from a US financial institution. And then just a brief warning that we do not advise that you travel outside the US after degree conferral date and until you get your EAD card. So for you, that means we're not advising that you leave the US after June 12th until you get that EAD card, because your program end date on your I-20 will not change. So on paper, it looks like your status is done. And without that EAD card, you may not be entered in the US in F1 status. So if you're not entered in the US in F1 status and you're entered in a tourist visa because the CBP officer just wants to get you out of line, then that ends your OPT before it's even started. So we do not advise that you leave the US after degree conferral until you get that EAD card. So let me stop sharing the screen. All right, so just a reminder, part 2 of the application workshop will be on March 14th. All of you should know by now that that is the earliest you can submit your application to USCIS. And then we're also going to offer a new post-OPT session on June 1st. This is going to be a session about how you maintain your legal status under post-OPT. So again, we'll talk about the reporting requirements that you'll have under post-OPT, the SCVP portal, what unemployment looks like under OPT, travel, visa renewal, documenting self-employment. We'll get into all of that on this June 1st session. So now let's take a look at your questions, and I will stop sharing. I know some of you put questions into the chat. If you could enter those in the Q&A, that's what I'm going to look at first. And I'm just going to grab some water first. All right. First question asks, can you apply for OPT while you are in the US and then leave the country for a short period? Yes, as long as you are coming back before the degree conferral date. It's June 12th, the program end date on your I-20. Your newest I-20 will be the OPT endorsed I-20, so that's what you'll be re-entering the US with. It'll have a new travel signature on it. Also, the nice thing about the online application is you get an immediate receipt number. So you can print that out as well, and just have that on hand. I don't know why they would ask you for that, but if you're re-entering the US before your degree conferral date, but you'll have that receipt number from the submission of your OPT application. Are we able to start the USCIS application now as long as we submit on March 14th or later? So the answer is yes, but be very careful not to submit that application. It is saved, and I think it's still accessible to you for some period of time. I want to say 30 days before USCIS deletes it out of your My USCIS account. But you can create your account, take a look at the form, start filling it out. That's okay, just don't submit it. The only caution around that in my mind and in my paranoia is if you're outside the US starting the online I-765, they'll be able to tell where you are when you're doing the application. You're not submitting it, you're just taking a look at it while you're outside the US, but I don't know. That would be my only note of caution on that. If you're starting it or taking a look at it from within the US, that's okay. From outside the US, I'd be a little more cautious. Do I have to be in the US only when I submit the application or until it is accepted? Only when you submit the application. You have to be in the US when you submit that application. I'm sorry, accepted. So it's accepted immediately now that it's online. I read that as approved. So as soon as you submit the application to USCIS, you get a receipt notice that it's been received. What if my employment start date is September 1st? Can I use the unemployment time to bridge that time period? Yes. So you will be putting a start date right at the end of that 60-day grace period, August 11th. And then the period of time between August 11th and September 1st will just be counted against that 90 days of unemployment. That's okay, because you'll still have some days saved up in case the job doesn't work out. You'll still have time to be able to find another job. But hopefully it does. But you never want to use up all of your unemployment days. You want to leave some for, if something doesn't work out with your current employment, that you have time to find another job. I see somebody else put something in the chat. Please use the the Q&A instead of the chat to ask your question. Is the latest employment end date we put 1 year after the start date minus 1 day? Yes. So your end date of employment will be 1 year minus a day. Can the employment start date be approximate? It remains TBD by my employer, but will definitely be mid-July. So approximate in the sense that you're not sure when you're starting. However, like I said earlier, once you submit your application to USCIS, that start date cannot change. So you could put July 15th or whatever the Monday is of that week as your start date, but just know that once you submit your application to USCIS and you get that EAD card with that start date of employment, you can't start earlier than that. I found a job and the start date is August 29th. Which OPT employment start date should I put? Thanks. In your case, the last start date possible, August 11th. Again, because you're not going to start working until August 29th, and it'll minimize the number of unemployment days that you're using out of those 90 days of unemployment. How is unemployment recorded? So USCIS figured out an algorithm to track your unemployment days. So if you don't report your employment in that SCVP portal, they are tracking the number of days from your EAD start date to when you report that employment. You have 10 days to report your employment from when it started. So you want to make sure that you are on top of that and you've reported your employment in the SCVP portal. Otherwise, USCIS will start counting your days of unemployment from the start date on your EAD card, which should be the start date that you requested when you requested the OPT endorsement. Let's see, there is a question that we frequently get asked as well. What if I request June 15th start date of employment, but my card, USCIS takes a longer time than the traditional 90-day processing time? Am I going to get a card with the June 15th start date, even though maybe I don't get the card until July, and is my unemployment going to start from June 15th? What USCIS does as a courtesy is they'll move your start date. If there's a super long processing time, they'll move your start date of employment closer to when the EAD card is produced. And so it minimizes the number of unemployment days that are being used. We don't know what the processing time will be for OPT applications because that changes quarter by quarter. And also USCIS is not transparent in their processing. There's a bunch of websites out there that track processing time by USCIS. I don't know how accurate those websites are. What we did see for fall and some winter quarter students was an extremely fast processing time by USCIS. There were students who reported getting their EAD cards within 30 days of submitting the OPT application, which was unheard of before they moved to the online system. So I don't know if that's going to hold true for spring quarter graduates, but USCIS was super fast the last 2 quarters on processing these OPT applications. I wouldn't count on that. I would still count the traditional 90-day processing time that they took before. So it could come quick or it may not. We don't know. I had a question for the remarks section on the I-20 OPT. It says to put the major in there, and I would put employment in the field of, insert your major here. I am in civil and environmental engineering, and the jobs are focus on data analytics, sustainability consultants. Is it okay to put my subtrack in there so that it says employment in the field of civil and environmental engineering, sustainable design and construction, so that it is more direct, relevant connection. No, you don't want to get that specific. You're either going to put the name of your degree or the name of the program as it appears on your I-20, and not more than that. And then when you report your employment in the SCVP portal, you can be more specific about how the job is related to your field of study. But that's not something that you want to put down on the I-20 when you're requesting your OPT endorsement. Does the application to graduate need to be approved first? Good question. I should note this on a future PowerPoint. No. All you need to do is submit your graduation application, take a screenshot of that. You do not have to wait for it to be approved in order to apply for the OPT. Do we have a recording link after this? Yes, this recording will be posted probably tomorrow, tomorrow Saturday, probably Monday or Tuesday next week on our post-OPT page. If I secure a job with a remote agreement, would I be able to return home for a portion of that period? If so, how much time? So this would be a great question for that maintaining your legal status under post-OPT session. The reason for that OPT exists is for you to be able to stay and work in the United States after you've graduated. If you're going to travel home and be outside the US, working from outside the US for some extended period of time, more than a month, 2-3 months, the longer you're outside the US, the more likely you might be scrutinized by CBP officers coming back in as to why you even need OPT if you can work from outside the US. So there's no, hard and fast time frame for how long you could be outside the US working remotely. It's just, again, that the whole point of OPT is for you to be able to stay and work within the US. When we enter employer information, is there any space to elucidate? Nice. How our major is related to our employer's industry. So again, you won't be doing that as part of your OPT endorsement request or the application to USCIS. You're going to be talking about how your job is related to your field of study when you enter that information in the SCVP portal. And I'm going to go into that if I'm doing the presentation, whichever advisor is doing the presentation in June, in more detail about that, because that is a pretty common question that we get from international students. But again, you won't be entering any employer information when you make the OPT endorsement request on your I-20 or when you submit the application to USCIS. Can we sign the OPT endorsed I-20 electronically? We can. And so I'm assuming that you can, but because I'm assuming I wouldn't, I would print it out, sign it in ink, and then scan it back in. Now you might have a picture of your signature that you could paste on there, but they've given us permission to be able to email these I-20s. Like when you print out that emailed I-20 for travel purposes, you're printing it out and signing it, and you have to have that hard copy at the port of entry. So until I can't assume the answer, I would say print out the OPT endorsed I-20, sign it, and then scan it back in as a PDF. For the mailing address for receiving mail, can I use a PO box? Yes. In fact, if you don't have a trusted friend or family member because you're going to be moving before you receive the EAD card, you can go down to the Palo Alto post office or any post office and get a PO box and use that as your mailing address. That's entirely possible. Is there a way we can get PDFs of all of our previous I-20s through Bechtel Connect or otherwise? Yes, those previous I-20s are in Bechtel Connect when you log in under your academic objective. I don't think there's a document center that yet exists in there, but you can find previous I-20s in Bechtel Connect. Otherwise, there is a request you can make on from the landing page on Bechtel Connect to request previous I-20s. You do not want to request just a blanket, give me all of my previous I-20s. You want to find out which ones you don't have and request only those. If I do have records of all my previous I-20s, including CPT, OPT, and other ones, should I upload all of them, or is it better to only include the previous CPT and OPT ones? You never want to give them more than what they're asking for. So you're only going to upload your previous CPT and prior OPT endorsed I-20s, not all of your other I-20s. The less they have to think about your application, the better off you are. So if you're uploading all of your previous I-20s and they get those, they're going to have to stop and think about, like, why am I getting all these I-20s that aren't endorsed? So you don't want that. Again, the rule of thumb is the less they have to think about your application, the better off you are. Do you have to be in the US for the time you are on your OPT? I've already answered that. Go to the next one. When do USCIS start counting the days of employment if we haven't had a job offer? From the date of degree conferral or from the date of requested job beginning date? It's the date of requested job beginning date. The start date of employment on your EAD card is when USCIS starts counting days of unemployment. If you're not employed or you didn't enter your employment in the SCVP portal. Are you allowed to be employed part-time in order not to be considered employed during the OPT period? Is there a minimum number of hours? That is a great question again for that June 1st session. Once you're on OPT, USCIS considers 20 hours a week to be full-time employed. So what we in the real world would consider part-time, which is 20 hours a week, USCIS considers full-time. So you would report that part-time employment as full-time employment. That stops the unemployment clock. If you report employment that's part-time, that will not stop the unemployment clock. You have to be able to report employment as full-time, meaning you're working at least 20 hours a week. Do we have to start thinking about applying for the STEM extension now or closer when your first year of OPT is about to run out? Good question. The STEM extension, you'll be applying for that 100 days before your post-OPT ends. 100 days before the end date of employment on your EAD card is when you start the STEM extension application period. STEM extension has a few more requirements than post-OPT does. So you'll probably want to start thinking about that if you're eligible, 6 months into your post-OPT. Are you able to travel abroad for spring break if you file for OPT before the trip? Yes. I have an offer of employment from a company that also wants to submit an H-1B lottery for me. Will there be any complications if both H-1B and post-OPT are filed? No. In fact, you should file for OPT. OPT is a benefit of your F1 status, unlike the H-1B, which is an entirely different status. So if something goes wrong with your H-1B application or you don't make it in the lottery, you have OPT that you can use to stay and work in the US. So at the very least, you're applying for OPT as a safety net. How would we fill out the I-765 Social Security number area if we are going to be applying for a Social Security number soon, spring quarter? You can mark that you do not have a Social Security number and then that you do not want to apply for OPT. I'm sorry, that you do not want to apply for Social Security on the I-765. You would just mark no for both of those. Would I need to disclose an on-campus job in the additional section? No, on-campus employment does not require work authorization, so you do not disclose that on the I-765. Also, because it has no, on-campus employment has no impact on your OPT application, whereas CPT could, if you're a PhD student and you were authorized for 365 days of full-time CPT, that would end your OPT benefit. That's mainly what they're looking for. How many days after applying to USCIS do you get the EAD card? Don't know. Processing time by USCIS is not transparent. Like I said, for fall and winter graduates, they were processing those OPT applications very fast, faster than I've ever seen. So I would still take into consideration the traditional 90-day processing time. If they're super slow, it could take up to 120 days. Hard to imagine that with the way that they were processing fall and winter, but we really won't know until we get to June. Should we do anything for dependents? No. Could you please explain again about the 30-day expiration stuff if there's time left? Sure, so that is a question about the validity of your OPT endorsement on your I-20. So the endorsement that we make on your I-20 is only valid for 30 days, meaning that USCIS has to get the application within 30 days of that endorsement being made. However, on the I-20 itself, there's no indication of when we made that endorsement. It's not necessarily, although it's mostly true, but it may not necessarily be true that we endorse your application and print it the same day, then that would indicate when your OPT endorsement was made. I wouldn't rely on that again because we're about to get flooded with a lot of OPT applications, endorsement applications. So what my advice to you is to consider when you make the OPT endorsement to be the beginning of the 30-day validity period. So that in your mind, your OPT endorsement is going to expire 30 days from today if you submitted the OPT endorsement request today. And that's the way that I would think about it. Because if you submit an OPT application with an endorsement that's more than 30 days old, they will reject your application. Does Bechtel offer services to accept the EAD card on behalf of the student? No, you do not and should not be requesting your EAD card to be mailed to Bechtel. How long after application does it generally take for USCIS to issue and for us to get our EAD card? We talked about that already. Is it okay to travel right after submitting the OPT application as long as we're back in the US before June 12th? Just thinking about traveling for spring break. Yes, that is okay. Can we switch jobs during OPT? Yes, you can. It's easier to do than when you're under the STEM extension. Again, because OPT is an umbrella work authorization. It's not specific to a certain employment or employer. The STEM extension is specific to an employer, and so you can still change employers under the STEM extension. It's just not as easy as it is under post-OPT. If I'm also going through H-1B application for this year's lottery, is there anything special in the application for OPT that I should be aware of? No, those are two separate processes. They don't impact each other, and you should still apply for OPT even though you have a company that's sponsoring you for the H-1B. What is the latest start date I can start working if I graduate in June? Not sure how to interpret that question. Your requested start date of employment has to fall within that 60-day grace period. So has to be on June 13th is the earliest, August 11th is the latest start date that you can request. But then if you need some additional time after the requested start date of employment that shows up on your EAD card, then those days would count against the 90 days of unemployment. Can I click submit on USCIS at noon on March 14th and travel internationally on the same day at 8 p.m.? We get this question too. So to me, that's a red flag. I would not be doing that. I would advise traveling the next day, because if they really, really wanted to scrutinize, they would be able to see both. Why would they go looking for that? I don't know, but there's a potential to cause a problem, or at the very least cause additional scrutiny. And so I wouldn't be putting myself in that situation. I would just travel the next day. Can we leave the country after receiving the EAD card, but before starting employment? Yes, most definitely yes. Can we work multiple jobs during OPT? Yes, you can, as long as all the employment is related to your field of study. Does part-time CPT count towards the 365 days limit of CPT? No, part-time CPT has no impact on OPT whatsoever. If we want to apply for CPT in spring quarter as well, what is the sequencing for getting OPT and CPT endorsed I-20s? That's a great question. I should actually add that to the next PowerPoint presentation, because we get this question a lot. So it doesn't really matter. You could submit your OPT application before getting your CPT endorsed I-20 for the spring, or CPT authorized I-20 for the spring. That's okay. If you want to wait to get that CPT authorized I-20 so that way you include it with your application, then you shouldn't submit the OPT endorsement request until you get that CPT authorized I-20. You can wait, that's fine. If you're ready to go on March 14th to submit your application to USCIS, but you won't be getting the CPT authorized I-20 until after March 14th, you can go ahead and submit your application to USCIS. That's fine. I'm starting to see some of the same questions repeat, so I'm gonna, if I'm silent for minutes, because I've already answered the question. I'm a PhD student. Can I apply to graduate before my defense? So I have an introduction to OPT where I talk a lot about PhD students and post-completion OPT, and a version of post-completion OPT that used to be called thesis pending OPT. So I would encourage you to take a look at that video, maybe view that section. Yes, you can apply for OPT before your defense. That's fine. If the employment starting date is sometime in mid-September, when can I apply for OPT? You're applying for OPT now during spring quarter. If this is your, if the spring quarter is your last quarter of study at Stanford and you're going to be graduating in June, then even though your employment's not starting until mid-September, because you're graduating end of spring quarter, you're applying for OPT as a spring quarter graduate. Even during OPT, my immigration status remains F1. That is correct. OPT is a benefit of the F1 status. Your status in the US and when you enter the US should be F1. I didn't leave the US, but I renewed my passport. Should I get a new I-94? The I-94 is just when it's your arrival record. So unless you're talking about leaving the US and coming back in just to get a new I-94 record with your new passport, that's not necessary. PhD candidate, have my defense on May 4th. Want to stay in summer to write and submit my dissertation. Can I still have the start date as June 13th? So the short answer is yes, but you should either watch the intro to OPT video that I did for that information or schedule an afternoon advising session. Because the answer is a little bit longer, but the short answer is yes. But there's a way to do that. Does the start date that we put down affect order of processing at all? No, it does not. USCIS will not take into consideration your requested start date when they're processing your OPT application. Can we create a USCIS account today, even if we're more than 90 days before graduation? You can, as long as you don't submit an application to USCIS. If I have a start date that is after the 60-day grace period, my start date is September 9th. Is this a problem? I don't mind using my part of my 90 days of unemployment. It is not. Can we travel internationally between degree conferral date and employment start date? Assuming you haven't received the EAD yet. So no, we do not advise that you travel after the degree conferral date without the EAD card. As I mentioned earlier, on paper, it looks like your status is done. So you need that EAD card to be able to re-enter the US in F1 status. If you don't have the EAD card because it was lost in the mail or something went wrong with your application, you can't submit the application from outside the US. Trying to get a replacement card while you're outside the US is really difficult. It's difficult enough from within the US. It's going to be super hard if you're outside the US. And if you try to re-enter without the EAD card and they enter you on some other visa type or some other status, that ends your F status, ends your OPT before it even starts. So we do not advise that you travel after degree conferral date without the EAD card. Assuming an expired visa, I was told we can stay in the US if we have an EAD card but can't leave the US. Does Bechtel assist at all in getting appointments with the embassy in our country? Asking us wait times there are so long, but I want to be able to go home before starting my job. Unfortunately, no, there's nothing that we can say or do to get you a faster or sooner appointment time. You would just have to try to figure that out in terms of giving yourself enough time to be able to be in your home country for your visa to be processed. You can schedule the appointment before you leave the US. It's just that the appointment's going to be some future date, and then you have to travel to your home country maybe a day or two before that date to apply for your visa. Can you please go back to the slide detailing June 1st workshop? Let me do that after we get through these questions. Can I apply for post-OPT application around March 14th and still apply for part-time CPT on March 20th for part-time internship starting? I talked about this already. If you want to wait for that CPT authorized I-20, then if you want to wait for that CPT endorsed I-20 before you apply for OPT, that's fine. And then you can include that CPT endorsed I-20 with your OPT application. I'm a little worried about the use around March 14th. It's on or after March 14th, not before March 14th, that you will be submitting your application to USCIS. Also, part-time internships starting April and going to June. That's not possible for spring CPT. If spring is your last quarter, then your last date of employment under CPT is going to be the last day of finals. So I'm hoping you don't mean June 12th as the end of your part-time internship during the spring, because that wouldn't be possible. And is submitting at any time on March 14th fine, or is there a first acceptable time? We took a look at this. Any time should be fine. It's not worth submitting it at 12:01 a.m. on March 14th. I'd say in the morning, you know, at a reasonable hour. There's no reason to be submitting this at 12:01 a.m. on March 14th. It's not going to make any difference in the processing of your application by USCIS. What if I cannot get EAD card even after degree conferral day due to administrative processing or background checking? I know someone's OPT has got checked for more than... I have never heard of an OPT application that required administrative processing or background checking. That's usually involved when applying for a visa. Your application for OPT, if there's a long delay in the processing of that application, usually just involves the processing of whatever is going on the processing end of USCIS. That will likely have nothing to do with your application. The approvals of these OPT applications are pretty automatic, assuming that there isn't anything wrong that you entered incorrectly in the I-765. There was more room for error on the paper application than there is for the online application. So, you know, the errors that I could see possible with the online application, you submitted too early before March 14th, you didn't include the OPT endorsed I-20, or you didn't sign the OPT endorsed I-20. Otherwise, I've never heard of an OPT application that got stuck at USCIS because of administrative processing or background checking. If the EAD card does not arrive before 60 days or before 60 days after the conferral date, what will be counted as being unemployed because we cannot start? So I talked about this earlier. If there's a long delay in the processing of your EAD card, they will move the start date of employment closer to when the card is produced as a courtesy. I have a job offer that is related to my major, but not exactly my major. In the student remark of the OPT request, do I still put my actual major? Yes, it can't be anything different. In that remark field, it has to be the name of your major or the name as it appears on your I-20. It can't be anything else. Are there any tailwind effects of OPT on the lottery? Not that I'm aware of, and I don't think there should be. I've never heard of that. What additional steps do we have to take to add dependents to our OPT, or there's nothing additional to be done for dependents? In terms of the OPT application, there's nothing additional that you do for dependents because this is your work authorization as the F1. If you need to add dependents to your I-20, you can do that while you're on OPT. So that's not a problem. Does the EAD start date always coincide with the preferred start date on the post-OPT application? Yes, always, except in the case of a longer than normal processing time that goes past your requested start date of employment. Like I said previously, they will move as a courtesy your start date closer to when the card is produced. But otherwise, it will always reflect your requested start date of employment that you make when you're requesting the OPT endorsement. I have a CPT request for spring submitted this week and just submitted OPT request today. Should I expect to have one OPT issue with both endorsed? No, more likely you'll get a CPT endorsed I-20 or a CPT authorized I-20 and then an OPT endorsed I-20 later on. Can we leave the US after receiving EAD card and come back sometime between EAD employment start date, say August 90 plus after EAD employment start date around November? Leave after receiving EAD card, yes, and come back sometime between EAD employment start date and then 90 days after employment start date. So you can leave the US after you receive your EAD card. But again, the point of OPT is for you to be able to stay and work in the US. So I would have to know more about what you're thinking in terms of your travel plans. To answer your question, I would say you want to schedule an afternoon advising session because I would need to ask you a few more questions about what you're thinking. How long does it take Bechtel to endorse the I-20? 5 to 10 business days. We will be flooded with OPT requests starting today. So I'd count closer to 10 business days. And anyway, you can't submit your OPT application to USCIS more than before March 14th. But yeah, if you're going to submit a post-OPT endorsement request today, I wouldn't count on less than 10 business days to get it, just because we're going to have so many to process. If during my OPT my employment ceased at some point, will I have any grace period to stay in the US to find another job? This is also a great maintaining legal status under OPT question. So you only get the grace period once your OPT is completed. So meaning after the end date of employment on the EAD card. So if you happen to use up all of 90 days of your 90 days of unemployment prior to the end date of your EAD card, you don't get the 60 days of unemployment, if that makes sense. 60 days of grace period. So the 60-day grace period that you get after your following your OPT is, let me try to find a better way to explain this. You get a 60-day grace period following degree control date, the program end date on your I-20. You get a 60-day grace period at the end of your OPT, which is the end date of employment on your EAD card. If you want your OPT to end prior to the end date on your EAD card, there's no 60-day grace period. There are the 90 days of unemployment, but again, you would be using those 90 days of unemployment to try to find another job. If that's not your intention, then you should depart the US. All right. My company requires me to provide my work authorization. Will I get proof of acceptance from my OPT right after I filed the application online? Yes, yes, you will. It's immediate. You get a receipt number. We talked about that. When applying for jobs, sometimes they ask, will you need visa sponsorship in the future? Any advice on this? I get into that on the intro to OPT video, and I think I get into that on the intro to CPT video as well. Will you need visa sponsorship in the future? I usually advise students to answer no, because you have post-OPT and then you have the STEM extension. If you're eligible for the STEM extension, that's 3 years of work authorization. Who knows what's going to happen during those 3 years? And also, that's a way of filtering out international students. So why take yourself out of the running? Let them do that for you after they've interviewed you, because they may fall in love with you and it may not be an issue. Do we get an online/email notification when our application gets approved before the EAD is sent to us? Good question. You get an immediate receipt number following submission. You may get an email, I'm not sure, but the next update that you'll get will be when your OPT is approved, and the next update that you get after that is when your card is mailed to you. Can I travel outside the US after receiving my EAD card and while unemployed? Yes. That's not a problem coming back into the US. So when you're coming back to the US unemployed and on OPT, you want to have documentation with you that indicates or shows that you're looking for a job in case you get asked by the CBP officer at the port of entry. You can produce, an updated resume, updated LinkedIn account, emails that you've printed out that show that you're looking for a job. Again, the issue is not leaving the US, the issue is coming back into the US. Does one report the program given in the I-20 or what the major is called at Stanford? I default to what the major is called at Stanford. That's your field of study. That was your program of study at Stanford. I'm doing a master's in mechanical engineering and my job is software engineer position. What job field should I put in the OPT process? Mechanical engineering. Have other students ever had real issues with their field of study not being sufficiently related to their job, even if they are somewhat arguably related? What are their consequences? This is another great question for that June session. I should be copying and pasting these questions down. So have there been students who have been questioned about the field of study being related to their job? Yes. That doesn't normally happen during post-OPT. It happens it can happen when applying for the STEM extension. I've seen that there. I've also seen it when a student applies for H-1B. That's when they take a closer look at your employment and how your employment is related to your field of study. If they don't think it is, or they question whether it is or not, you get something called a request for further evidence. It'll describe what you need to submit to them in order to really prove to them that your job is related to your field of study. There was a section on the online application you went through called USCIS online account number. Should that be the number of the USCIS account we create, or should we leave it blank? Leave it blank. Is there a recommended latest possible time to start the USCIS application, or is March 14th recommended? The earlier that you apply for OPT, the better, for a few different reasons. One of them being that if there's a problem with your application, there's still time to be able to correct that and resubmit the application or do whatever USCIS asks you to do to fix it. That gets more problematic after degree conferral date, but it is possible to apply for OPT even after graduation, after the program end date on your I-20, as long as you have not departed the US. if it's June 13th and you've left the US to go on vacation or back to your home country and then changed your mind and now want to apply for OPT, it's too late. By leaving the US after your program end date and not having applied for OPT, you've ended your F1 status. So yes, you can apply for OPT if you did not after graduation, but only if you're still in the US. Do we need to upload EAD from a previous OPT? Yes, I would still upload the passport bio page, but either upload the previous EAD as a separate upload or make it as part of a single PDF with the passport bio page and then the previous EAD card. Could you repeat how long you can work from abroad under OPT currently? So again, there's no set, period of time that you can work under OPT while abroad. It's just that OPT was meant for you to stay and work in the US. The longer you're outside the US working, the more likely you'll face additional scrutiny at the port of entry as to why you even need OPT, potentially with them not entering you in the US in F1 status under OPT. It's something within reason. Anything more than 3 weeks starts to set flags off in my mind. So, if this was something I was considering as an international student to be able to work remotely under OPT, if I'm outside the US for more than 3 weeks, I would start to worry. Again, that doesn't mean that you're not going to face additional scrutiny if you're working outside the US for just 2 weeks. That's always possible. It's always at the discretion of the CBP officer at the port of entry as to, how much of a hard time they want to give you. Probably shouldn't have phrased it that way exactly. If I did my undergrad degree in another school in the US and had OPT after that, before starting my master's degree program at Stanford, do I also need to upload my transfer complete and transfer pending I-20 from Stanford? No. You will have to note in that additional information section your prior OPT and also upload, if you have that I-20 with the OPT endorsement as part of your application, but you're only submitting I-20s with prior CPT authorization or prior OPT endorsement. You're not submitting any other I-20s, so you would not be submitting your transfer complete or transfer pending I-20s. Can you use OPT, for example, conduct research at an archive at another institution? This work is rewarded a fellowship. You can, as long as that employment is related to your field of study. If this is employment, and you've reported in the SCVP portal. If someone has an intern offer instead of a job, can he or she still use this offer as proof of employment from the start date on the EAD card to avoid the cost of unemployment days and wait for an internship is employment. So if it's at least 20 hours a week, you can report, and it's related to your field of study, it is eligible for you to do that employment, and you report it in the SCVP portal and it stops the unemployment clock. Any H-1B questions should be directed to the immigration attorneys, although the one Sarah asked kind of awkward to ask. But we have a Visas Beyond Stanford presentation on March 9th at 1 p.m. with an immigration attorney who will talk about H-1B. So if you have an H-1B question, please attend that session and you can ask it there and get an answer. Do you guys assist us at all in renewing visas? Need to do that to be able to leave country post receiving EAD card and pre-job start date. If you have specific questions, you can schedule an afternoon advising session. We can answer it. It's pretty straightforward in terms of renewing a visa. It's the same process as when you first applied, if you remember that process. If not, start with our website, and then you can always schedule an afternoon advising session if you have specific questions about renewing your visa. I have a valid I-20, but my F1 visa has expired. Can I still travel abroad after getting my EAD card and before starting employment? Only if you can renew your visa before coming back to the US. You have to have a valid visa for re-entry to the US. So make sure that your visa is valid for re-entry, and if not, make sure you have enough time before the start of the quarter to be able to renew your visa and have that to come back to the US. Is there a deadline to apply for graduation? So when I was looking up the graduation application period, I Googled Stanford graduation application and I got to their website. That information should be there. I don't know offhand when their deadline is. Can I potentially have a friend submit my OPT application for me if I plan to travel before March 14th? No, they know that you're outside the US. Your friend can't submit the OPT application for you because they know that you've departed the US and we're not in the US when that application was submitted. Don't do that. We are down to the last 5. I saw some stuff coming in through the chat, but oh, a bunch of thanks. All right. So let's take a look at these last 5. My major is management science and engineering, but my I-20 says industrial engineering. What should I put in my OPT application? You would put management science and engineering. I would send an email though, confirm if that's to us, confirming that that's the correct zip code. Only because I'm asking myself that question and I don't know it offhand. But in any case, you would put management science and engineering. I had a social security number at one time 20 years ago. I no longer have a copy of that number. What should I do? That number is still associated to you. Once you get a social security number, that number is yours for the rest of your life. If you don't know what that number is, you should find out, and you'll probably have to go to the Social Security office and file an application to get a new Social Security card. Not a new number, but a new card. Unfortunately, they will not be open to drop in through March. They did not let us know when. I don't think they know when they're going to reopen to drop in. So it's one of those things. You can send us an email asking for the process. We can outline it for you, and then you'll just have to call them repeatedly until you reach them to schedule an appointment to go in and apply for that replacement card. Do we need an SSN for being a TA? Going back to so the TA, yes, eventually, not to start, but you can use the TA ship to qualify for an SSN. And you definitely want to use that employment to get the SSN because it'll make your life a little bit easier after graduation. That way you don't have to worry about getting that number for your employer after you graduate. You already have it. So use the TA ship to get an SSN if you don't already have one. And final question. If I get a green card sometime during my OPT, or if I don't need OPT at all, will I retain access to my Stanford email account? No, your email is available to you while you're on OPT and the STEM extension. So if you're no longer on OPT or the STEM extension, you should consider your Stanford email account to be closed. That is all. So 93 questions. I'm kind of proud of myself. All right. I want to thank all of you that are remaining and all of you that have attended, all of you those that are watching this video. Thank you very much for taking the time for being here. Really appreciate having you here. Really hope that this presentation helped. I will see some of you on March 14th for any, oh, the June 1st slide. Let me put that up before we go. I will see some of you on March 14th. If you have any remaining questions, here's the June. Let me know if you can't see that. Here's the slide about the June 1st session. So I'll see some of you on March 14th. Otherwise, hope to see some of you on June 1st as well. For the maintaining your legal status under post-OPT session. All right, I will leave this up for a minute longer while I take some water. And then we'll go ahead and end the session. All right, have a great weekend, everybody. It's been my pleasure. Take care.